Good morning, Team Alabama. We are on page 191 of Hidden Figures. Please join me there on page 191. Katherine Johnson invited Christine to join the choir at church. The two women got to know one another outside of the office, but they never worked together. Because Katherine was so modest, it would be years before Christine knew the full scope of her work. When someone acknowledged her achievements, Katherine said, "Well, I'm just doing my job." For Katherine, doing her job meant quietly sharing the joy when missions went well as grieving with the others when missions failed. Like the others at NASA, Katherine was devastated in January of 1967 when an electrical fire on board the Apollo 1 command module took the lives of three astronauts, Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Gus Grissom. The tragic end of Apollo 1 shook NASA to its core. The astronauts had been on the ground inside the module on the launch pad in Cape Canaveral when an electrical spark caused a fire that flashed through the inside of the craft, killing all three men inside. The engineers redesigned the spacecraft, carefully discovering, then fixing the flaws that had caused the fire. They honored the dead by learning from the mistakes of the past and carrying on with future missions. Each experience offered important information that could be applied to future flights. In 1960s, the Apollo program built on its successes, steadily aiming towards a landmark achievement of the space program, a manned mission to the moon. Mission to the moon. The 238,900-mile mission to the moon would take 6 days, 3 days to get there and 3 days to come back. The ambitious plan included 21 hours exploring the surface of the moon for two astronauts in the lunar lander, a separate vehicle that would drive across the moon while the service module circled above. The plan sounded simple, but Katherine Johnson knew better than anyone that if any aspect of the Apollo 11 mission to the moon went wrong, the astronauts could be stranded in space, never again to see their earthly home. Years later, Katherine would say that working on the math that coordinated the orbiting Apollo Command and Service Module, the CSM, one part of the spaceship that would remain parked in orbit around the moon, with the ship's lunar lander, the rowboat, of a module that would take the astronauts from the CSM down to the moon's surface, was the highlight of her career at NASA. The leadership of the Space Task Group set a risk standard of 3 nines for the space mission. In other words, it required that every aspect of the program, every part, every plan, every person succeeded 999 times out of 1,000. The astronauts were prepared to give their lives to their mission, but they didn't want to die because of a math error. Katherine Johnson worked long hours to make sure the astronauts stayed safe. She arrived at the office early, went home in the late afternoon to check on the girls, and sometimes came back to work in the evening, maintaining a schedule of 14 or 16-hour days. She and the engineers she worked with asked each other what-if questions. What if the computers went out? What if there was an electrical failure on board the spacecraft? What if something went wrong? They had to think ahead, anticipating and solving every problem they could think of before it happened. Chapter 23, One Small Step. A human being on the moon? It was hard for most people to believe that something that humankind had dreamed of for thousands of years was finally coming true. It also amazed many Americans to learn what an expensive trip it was. Together, the Apollo missions cost a mind-boggling $24 billion, or about $156 billion in today's dollars. Not everyone believed that the exploration of space was worth the astronomical price tag. A few days before the Apollo 11 launch, 200 protesters marched outside Cape Canaveral as part of the Poor People's Campaign, a movement designed to bring attention to the problems facing poor people of all colors. At the beginning of the 1960s, the space program and the civil rights movement shared a sense of optimism. Scientific idealists believed that technical know-how would make the future better, and civil rights advocates fought hard to ensure that everyone, regardless of race or color or background, would receive the blessings of democracy that the United States Constitution promised all of the country's citizens. By the end of the decade, some of those civil rights leaders argued that the billions of dollars spent to send a handful of people to the moon could help many millions of poor people right here on Earth. Activists challenged NASA to consider the worthiness of the space program when disadvantaged people on Earth could barely put food on the table. Many people who also asked why there weren't any black astronauts and why there were only a few black engineers on the or scientists working for NASA. African Americans believed that the outer space belonged to people of every race, and the space program should too. Not many of them knew that in Hampton, Virginia, black women like Catherine and Dorothy and Mary and Christine were working hard using their mathematical talents to help the United States. Landing. On July 20th of 1969, more than 600 million people around the world sat in front of their TVs, eager for their first close-up look at the heavenly body that they had only ever seen in the sky from their earthly homes. Okay, we're going to stop there. That's page 196. We will finish in just a few minutes.